talks about crossing over to Jordan and being with my Lord. So that's where that came from. And it's really relevant today. It still speaks to the situations that are going on. And uh, uh, Amy, I think you mentioned George Floyd, but that song came back to me again when I saw that video. I thought to myself, um, you know, how alone he must have felt, and how helpless he must have felt at that time.
Yes. Anyone else? Did you have any thoughts? What stuck out to you the most and why? And how did it remind you of things that are going on today?
So one of the things that's interesting to me, and obviously I bring a different lens in this space. So from a historical perspective, when I first watched it and heard the hymn in the background, recognizing that spiritual hymns were often used as a form of rebellion and communicating rebellion in the time of slavery. And so with the music coupled with his movement, the interpretation for me then was that rebellion has always been part of this experience. And I think that sometimes those moments don't get spoken about. And I think that it's important to recognize the power that has always existed as well. And so that was an interpretation for me when I first saw the video.
You're absolutely correct. Yeah, I agree.
Wonderful. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our second clip. Darrell, would you like to speak a little bit about this second clip since it is your solo?
I I'll wait till after the clip because I have feelings. I do.
Woke up this morning with my mind was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the lab rulers high, for the ramparts we watched were so gallant and we sing, my country, 'tis of thee sweet land of liberty, of thee I see.
So that was another excerpt from Freedom from Cecil Slaughter's piece Repass. That was a solo by Darrell. Actually, let me hear what you all felt about that. Did those of you who have never seen that before, tell me what you noticed, what you saw, what struck you the most?
I thought it was interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. I thought it was interesting on how it started. It kind of showed like it was, the morning, the start of a new day. And I think that kind of just symbolizes, no matter what happens, and, the different tribulations we go through, each day is new and we kind of wake up with, refreshed sense of optimism. And then when it switched over, to the anthem, you could kind of see the mood change, and it was kind of, almost like a back to reality, type of scene to where, the anthem's playing and you listen to the words, and yet, you saw the fight and the emotion and, showing that this is supposed to be for us because we are citizens, in America, but it's such a fight to try to get those words to ring true for our own personal experiences. So, I thought, from the beginning and then kind of jumping, to that scene, to kind of just the reality we live in every day was pretty powerful.
Amy, you want to tell us your thoughts?
Yeah, so that was Cameron took really all my words, but that was I think I was confused at the song that was playing. I mean, that like was already like, what you're gonna do dance to this song, and it's like freedom like that. And I think I said wow out loud, which of course you couldn't hear me because I was on mute, but for you to be in the position at the end, it was like so heartbreaking. Like, and then I was like, wow, that was when I said like, this is horrible. So yes, like all of the ways in which citizenship should be there, but isn't there, and captured beautifully in the dance. So.
Darrell, go ahead and tell us some of your thoughts and what you were feeling and what we talked about during our rehearsal process.
Yeah, for sure. And then Cameron and Amy definitely hit the nail on the head. Going through the process, it was interesting to, as dancers, we are asked to convey emotions. We are asked to put ourselves in scenarios and become the piece, become whatever. And for me, it was almost too real in certain situations, particularly performing this solo as a Black man. I had very real lived experiences to draw from, as you all mentioned, living as a Black man in a space where I am thought to be a part of. I grew up, saying the national anthem and, doing things that all American kids do, right? And then to have to go through experiences that then make very clear that I am not the same as everyone else. And not just that I am not the same, but I am not thought of as equal. And how do you navigate those spaces? How do you continue to be patriotic in a space where you're not welcomed? Amy made mention of the kind of stance at the end. Again, the Freedom Concert was a lot of our response to, was developed in response to shooting of Michael Brown. And, a lot during this time, it was the very popular or very highly used hands up, don't shoot. And you see that in the movement, that idea of my hands are up. Like I'm trying to be patriotic, right? I'm singing the national anthem, but I still have to make myself very visible. I still have to say, hey, here are my arms. Please don't harm me because of who I am. So yeah, it was a very, very difficult process just to be able to not just get the movement, but to have to perform that piece, night after night, still make it new, still make it fresh, but also still not let those very real emotions take hold, or take hold in a way that almost prevents me from being able to do it. Because I felt and I had conversations with some of the dancers and some of the staff at the time about just some of the pieces in the concert sometimes were difficult. It just was difficult because we were being, I won't speak for anyone else, but I was being asked to place myself in a situation and present it on stage when it's something that I live every day. and how do you perform that? You know, how do you bring that out of yourself and put that on stage for viewing purposes without taking some of yourself every time? So that was definitely a challenge and a battle, but one I was very, very thankful for Cecil for giving me to be able to try to conquer.
Darrell, I wanted to piggyback on what you just said, because you as a dancer had difficulty performing because it was so real. And I feel like all of us, regardless of what our professions are, as Blacks, right, particularly now in this moment in which we're living, we're all having a difficult time code switching. You're supposed to show up and be happy-go-lucky and pretend like all this pain in the world is not impacting you, but all of us are being impacted by it. The world is being impacted by it, but in a different way. We live this, we breathe this every day. You know, you as a black male, but we as Black women also, because we relate to the Breonna Taylors and the Atiana Jeffersons and Sandra Bland's and so forth and so on. And so the duality of our life and our experiences shows up every day, and it's tough. So I appreciate that piece and what you just spoke about.
I want to take a minute to talk about this process with Cecil, which I am so grateful for. Cecil allowed us to have a lot of conversations. And in these conversations, Darrell and I think specifically found out more about genuine ignorance that we didn't know before, as well as our white counterparts who were dancing with us didn't know what was offensive versus them. It was a genuine response to things like me being asked the question, "What are you?" Referring to, because I am so light-skinned, me being mixed. The question is, what are you? Or what are you mixed with? Or who is white in your family? Or Darrell being told in multiple panels that we've had after a show, "Oh, you're so articulate." And they're meaning it as a compliment, but that doesn't come across as a compliment when it's like, why are you surprised that I'm articulate? Why are you asking me, what am I? What am I? How am I supposed to respond to what am I? So I want to take a minute to talk about some of those questions that we are asked as African Americans that are, that I think some people don't realize those comments or questions are very disrespectful and hurtful, and how you have to, as an African American female, how I am made to keep my composure at all times. I am told that if I react a certain way, that I will get the backlash, even if you are disrespecting me, even if you are offending me. It is my job to educate you and to make sure that you understand that, hey, I know that you're trying to be nice and you're trying to give me a compliment, but that was hurtful for you to say something like that. Can anyone talk about an experience that they've had encountering something like that?
I would just like to say that Cameron, Amy, and Michelle, and especially Darrell, is spot on. And the way Michelle put it was the way I was feeling at that time. I played with this idea. I've been playing with this idea for the past maybe 20 years. In this particular performance, in this particular role, it happened to be a Black man, an Asian man, and a Latinx man. Have two of each have performed that role. It is a longer work, but it's the contradiction of those words, as Amy was saying, that I don't, as a Black man, as me, myself, I don't see the flag in the way a lot of people see the flag. And so there's that internal struggle of having to show up and, like Michelle said, do that code switching, you know? So my experience has been not so much that I've been asked what am I, but I've been told what I am growing up. You know, you're Black and you belong here and you don't, you know, just, you know, not even saying it out loud a lot of times. People try to put you in a particular place. So how am I supposed to turn around and respect certain values when I don't feel appreciated, when I don't feel like I belong? And I am an American. So how do I reconcile that?
Yeah, so this is Amy. I would say, so I work in corporate America and I've spent most of my career there. And I'm always fascinated by, because I've changed jobs a lot of times. I like to solve problems. But I'm always fascinated by the questions I get asked. So either I get asked like, tell me about, you know, growing up in poverty. You know, what was that like? Are your parents really proud of you now? And I'm like, well, I'm fourth generation educated. My grandma was a politician. There are two judges in my family. Like in my family, you know, being successful is highly expected. And like, I'm not even the top dog. Like, you know, y'all might be excited, but like, I got two judges, right? Like, it's a you know, a hill to climb. But I think the harmful pieces around like the assumptions about who you are is like, none of that even matters. Like, it doesn't matter who my parents were or how I grew up, because when I walked through that door, what they said in the question that was prompted was, you couldn't have come from anything, anywhere. You can't be anybody. You can't be a somebody from where you are. When you get here, you're just Black. You're another Black woman who works here, and you should be grateful for being in this space. And we'll remind you all the time how grateful you should be. I think the only other thing I would say is, in school, I got a lot of conversations with white teachers about not being like the other Black children, which was like incredibly harmful. That somehow being smart and Black weren't synonymous, and somehow that was somehow exceptional instead of the actual rule. Like, everything smart is Black, which would have been my home life. Like, of course we're smart. The first libraries were in Africa. We are descendants of Africa, therefore we are bound to be literate, right? To hear a contradiction from a person of authority like an educator was very confusing. And I asked a lot of questions of my parents because I kept hearing some kind of exceptionalism around class and standard American English, that if I hadn't have been as fortunate as I was for parents that were as clear as they were, I would be so disconnected, not just from my Black peers, but from myself. And that probably would have led my entire life and trajectory in a completely different path. And I know that it probably seemed like they were trying to be helpful or even nice, but it was so harmful in so many ways.
I think what we deal with in those spaces is, you know, you kind of defy the system of racism in a way. And those questions are a reflection of that. So people ask you like, you know, what's your story? They're curious because subconsciously they're asking themselves, as a Black person, you're not supposed to be here. So we need to figure out how you got to this point. So, you know, the, you know, affirmative action hire, you know, rich parents, you know, and in that, you know, it's funny that, you know, Amy brought up those points because, you know, it's interesting. Almost one of the ways in order to, I guess, cope with a Black person in a space that they're not supposed to be in is stripping them of their Blackness. Oh, well, you speak proper, or your parents are well off. So yeah, you don't count, pretty much. So you're an exception to the rule. So it's almost a way to try to, you know, figure out a way to put you in a box to say that you're an exception, because success for people like you, or people like you being a part of this space, shouldn't be possible. And they don't say that outright, but you see that in their reactions. And, you know, they need to have answers to say, how did this person defy the box that is systemic racism and get to the point to where they're at?
Gabby, you said that there were some people in the audience who had something that they wanted to ask or interpret.
We just had a few comments coming in on the different pieces that were shown. First from Darian Soloed, just a lot of comments that they were feeling the suffering and pain that he was portraying. And then on Darrell's solo, they were saying they felt like it was representing someone who fights for a nation that criminalizes him.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that, Gabby. One thing that's interesting as we talk about families and how family dynamics kind of represent themselves and how we're looked at. My younger brother, he was born in New Orleans and I was born in Long Beach. But while I was living in New Orleans, my dad was in the Navy, so I was able to go to like the naval schools and all that, and all the education that came along with that. But my brother, he was still fairly young, fairly susceptible, especially to the language and the accents of New Orleans. And then once we left New Orleans and moved to Kansas City, it was always interesting because my brother was very intelligent, but people never assumed that we were related. My brother and I, we look a little different. But anytime we would be together, because his accent was so strong, he had that New Orleans drawl, and again, very intelligent, but people just would assume, and because I went to the naval school, I was very proper and mommy, I spoke very differently than my brother did. But again, people initially, or not initially, but almost automatically would just count him out or just assume things about him just because of his mannerisms and because how he spoke. And I think that is very indicative of how people are looked at, across the board. Just people are automatically judged inherently, whether it's by their skin color or their initial first words. If you don't automatically give off that prim and proper, especially as a Black person, then you're automatically slumped with all the other people, as opposed to the exceptional person that Amy speaks about. And again, it does vary. And like my brother, he would ask me, he was like, I'm smart. And I'm like, yeah, you're very smart. But he would, even at a young age, he would question, why don't people think I'm smart? And it's because of situations like that, and then how that later shapes him. You grow up assuming that you're not smart because people always say that about you, or the opposite. You assume that you're the special person. You become then a lot of times the almost like the ambassador for your race. It's like, well, I have to do this because I am the only person that these people look at as someone that's worth anything. And it's so, not only does that put a tremendous amount of pressure on one person, but no one person can be the spokesman for an entire group of people, for an entire race. And then unfortunately, it definitely, it doesn't give true value to that person when they have that pressure on them.
Powerful words. Yes. Love that. I will add to that only because I agree with Amy. I grew up in a house where I'm not the first that's educated, it was expected of me to be great. And so when people question my greatness, I'm like, oh, well, I thought that this was normal. Should I question why I am where I am? Why should I question that? And I also, because I am so fair skinned and everyone else in my family, my two sisters, my mom and my dad are all darker than me, I experienced confusion on who I should identify as, because I was that friend where anyone who was my skin color felt more comfortable with me, but they knew that I was still Black. So it was still acknowledged that, hey, we all know that you're Black, but you're more acceptable in a way. So then it was like, oh, I'm better or prettier, or I'm more accepted because of my skin color. So it's a good thing for me to be light skinned. It's a good thing for me to straighten my hair. It's a good thing for me to do this. But my mother says otherwise. She says, no. I remember there's a picture of me my mom took on my 3rd birthday, and my theme was for colored kids. And my mom reminded me on a regular basis, which I love her for, that I am beautiful because I am an individual, because I am who I am, because I am different. Being different, it makes you beautiful. Being different makes you who you are. And it is always an expectation for every individual, no matter what you look like, for you to be exceptional, because you can be. Everyone can be exceptional, no matter what you look like, no matter where you come from. Everyone has that quality that is innate in them. It is how society builds that up or breaks that down that determines if you will be successful or not. At least those are my thoughts. So with that, I would love it if we can move on to our next clip. So our next clip is choreographed by the amazing Jennifer Archibald. It is an excerpt from Dirt. I'm just going to go ahead and play the video. Let me do this. Share my screen. We're going to go next. All right. So tell me, I have lots of thoughts. This was, I have to be honest, I just love performing this piece. This is one of my favorites. I love performing Dirt, but tell me what your thoughts were. And then I want to go to Jennifer about what inspired you, because I know this music is so important and it's one of my favorite parts as well. So I want to know what you all thought as an audience first. What did you notice? And why did you notice that? And then I want to take it to Jennifer for her to talk a little bit about it. Let's say, Amy, what did you notice? No one? Well, Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about what you were inspired by, what the piece was about, what that little excerpt was about to you?
Yes. Well, the work is called Dirt, and I wanted to explore how freedom affected Indigenous people. I wanted to bring it back to the beginning of time and explore how Indigenous peoples and their environments that they maintain are always increasingly under assault. And I knew that if I was on a bill about conceptually about freedom, I just felt like I needed to make sure that I was touching on a topic that was different but not different. And that's ideally where I wanted. I kind of just wanted to go before time, but also make note that we're still dealing with the same issues now that we have been dealing with for years. And you had mentioned the music. The music is from a Canadian artist. The work is called Medicine Chant, and the composer is called Anila. And she's, what's interesting about her work is she creates work within the mountains. Like, she wants her work to kind of reflect the forest outside environment that she's in. So all of her vocal choices is really almost a reflection of the voices that you would hear if you were standing in the middle of a forest by yourself.
So I want to talk about why I chose this clip. In the beginning, one of the first things that you see is Jeff, who is a large white male, grab Darrell. He like grabs his chest, and all of us who are watching this happen turn away. We look away, and somehow that one move still affects all of us. So then you see this ripple effect of Natalie, the dancer, who like breaks down in the front, and then we try to lift her up, but then it goes into someone else who's falling into the group, and someone else is being lifted on top of the group. And it reminded me that for every one action, there is a reaction, and there is a large ripple effect that happens with everything that goes on, which is why I feel like it's so important for us to know about the past, to know about Indigenous people, to know about their struggles, to know about the African American struggles that bring us to today, to help us understand why things are happening the way they are happening right now. But also, I feel like when you understand, it's easier for you to come back or to help out or to be genuine with how you help, and to understand how you can help, and not just help for yourself because you just want to help, but to understand what the real struggle is and how to address and attack that real struggle. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
I would just like to say that is brilliant. And thank you for that. I mean, I looked at it and I was kind of like, this is out of my league. Like, cool music, wonderful dance, right? But I think it's so important that that the people that I think America would like for us to forget was actually their country, get uplifted at every corner, at every chance, at every opportunity, to remind people of whose America this is, and that everyone else came from somewhere else, either as, enslaved people or immigrants, because the Native Americans were already here. In that, I mean, we just dealt with COVID. And so this is such a good example again of the lack of resources that are provided and the ways in which communities get to be ignored in the middle of a pandemic. And that those are choices by policies and governments versus really honoring, knowing the history of Indigenous people in this country, which every young person should know and is like a blip in our history book. So I just wanted to say thank you. I think that's so important. And I really appreciate the brilliance behind thinking about that, but also creating a piece to express it.
Jennifer, when you explained the piece, because again, I didn't think that I really fully understood it until you explained it. So I really appreciate that. So thank you. And I think that the ode to Indigenous people is much needed, because much like Amy said, I think that sometimes we forget about who was already here. And just last week, or a few days ago, when Christopher Columbus's statue was removed here, there were people in uproar about it. And I remember us battling back and forth on social media because there were people that were bitter because of the removal of this statue. And I remember telling somebody that any symbol of oppression, like it or love it, it has to go. Like Amy said, there were people here when Christopher Columbus arrived. You can't discover anything when there are people living here already. And so there's a lot of ignorance about Indigenous people, even from terminology, referring to them as Indians instead of Native Americans. There's so much ignorance. And to Amy's point, there's so much oppression within that group. There are people still living on reservations and still not receiving benefits that they deserve, much like synonymous to African Americans. I could get into the fact that we need reparations for slavery. I won't go there yet, but it just, when you all brought up those valid points about the Indigenous people, that's where my mind immediately went. So thank you for that power and that eye-opening piece.
One thing that I will mention in the creation of Dirt, Jennifer Archibald has a knack for pulling out your best self. And not just your best self, but your truest self. So one of the sections that you don't get a chance to see kind of topping the piece is the dancers, we all have the opportunity to speak a little bit, which as a dancer, sometimes that can be a little nerve-wracking to have to talk to an audience. But we all have the opportunity to just essentially create our own spiel about ourselves and who we are and just what makes us us. You know, people talked about their animals, and some people talked about their racial background. I remember talking about my name and the fact that it's spelled like Daryl but pronounced Darrell. And you know, so it was that setup that I think really helped to really jump into this idea of community and who you are and where you come from. And then we get deeper as we start to really get into the movement on this idea of land and ownership. And I remember around this time that it was first created, this was when there was the contention about the Dakota Pipeline. So a lot of that conversation was very on the forefront of people's minds. And so something that's very unique is this idea of community and what does it mean to be a community? How can you exist within a community as a whole? And then what contentions can still happen within the community? And I think that's something that we see today, you know, as we attempt to come together, you know, around this idea of racial injustice. We want to come together as a community, right? We want to unify and we want to be one. But where are those cracks in this idea of community and those people who are, you know, a lot of people talk about how so many companies now are so eager and so willing to say Black Lives Matter, right? When this is a term that has been used for years now, but all of a sudden now people are more willing to kind of stand behind that. And so it's that idea of, is that sincere idea of community? You know, how do you still bring them in while still watching their intentions? And I feel in that piece, we really got to dive into the intricacies of community, how you build it, how it breaks down, you know, what that truly means.
That's what I was going to say. When I saw the piece on the concert, it blew me away as well. And the thing that was most powerful about the piece for me was that sense of community and how that community, there was movement in that community. And that's where I got the sense of freedom when I saw that piece. But yeah, it's a brilliant work. And the overwhelming sense of a people, what struck me the most.
Thank you. I'm gonna just say one thing. When I do create work, it's important for me to build emotional arcs in my work, but also make sure that I can relate my work to the audience members. Sometimes for me, when I see work, it could be so abstract that you don't really know what you're seeing or why you're seeing it or how it's hitting you emotionally. And when Madco came to me and told me the topic of freedom, it can go in so many directions. And I think it was important for me to, you know, even at the beginning of this discussion that we have with all of us, Belisa, you're saying that we want to create an atmosphere where we're not critiquing and we feel comfortable in stating our opinions and we're okay and taking information and sending information out and no one and not a hostile environment. And I think I wanted to make a work in the same way, in the sense of having an audience member be vulnerable as they sit and watch and let it lay on them. And that was kind of, that was the goal, for them to see that there is an even playing field and that we are all a part of this. That was very important to me. That's all.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that. Gabby, did we have any comments? No, okay, great. Yes, I will say that again, I've said it before, but this is still one of my favorite pieces. I do think that we as dancers got a chance to explore each other more in this piece. There's, I think in the beginning, you won't see this clip, but in the beginning, there's a chance where we're just like in this big circle and you see two people come at each other and it's just us looking at each other to gauge each other out, to kind of see and explore, who is this? Let me explore you. Let me dive into who you are rather than telling you who I am. And I really enjoyed that process of learning my fellow dancers even more in that way. So thank you for that, Jennifer. We're going to move into our next clip. This piece is choreographed by Gina Patterson. This is the clip. I think I'm going to show you the clip first, and then we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. So that is a nice little section choreographed by Gina Patterson. The piece is called It Is. Does anyone, can you tell me a little bit about what you noticed and why? Anyone in the panel, and I'll tell you a little bit about this section. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this section. So this is, I know that this specific part for me was about the walls and about these barriers and about how we as humans create these walls, as well as there are walls created for us. And so I want to take a moment to talk about some of those walls or I want you all to take a moment to talk about walls that we create for ourselves to either protect ourselves or to keep people out, as well as walls that we feel like are created for us that are keeping us out or boxing us in this specific area. But I do, and Gina, correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe that section is about the walls that were created. I want to say, yes, about the walls that are created.
I saw this piece for me is such a human endeavor. You know, there wasn't a dry eye in the house afterwards. And the reason it's why is because I felt like Gina touched the audience in a very direct way. You're talking about the walls, we all build them. And for me, just to see the expression through movement of how we deal with that and how we attempt to break them away. Sometimes when I build walls around myself, there are times I don't know how to get out, and someone outside comes in to help. And I think that was a very important aspect of the work that she, for me, she really put into movement that expression. And I felt like the dancers were talking to me throughout the whole thing.
Yes, Cecil and Isa, that was exactly right. I was really thinking a lot about the emotional and physical walls that are we build around ourselves, that are built around us. And at the very beginning, I was sort of really the piece, you know, they had talked about, we were talking about it being a response to the research at the Oldland Library. And I have to say, a lot of it was very angering, a lot of the images, and it was very upsetting. And it really, as a very sensitive person, it really touched me, reached me deeply. And I wanted to investigate, how could I share this feeling with an audience? How is it possible to help somebody feel empathy or relate or ask questions? It really was a piece. Was a piece about asking questions. And around the time, you know, there was a lot of talk about the border walls, and, you know, it just went into the metaphorical aspect of the walls and the emotional. And then what does that do to families and communities? And, you know, even the walls we put around ourselves, how does that affect various families and how people are perceived or accepted? So it just, the piece also, there's a lot of different layers to it. And I found myself, after going through all the research and listening to the interviews, just very frustrated and upset. And I knew I wanted to attempt a work that sort of played almost like a meditation, flashes, images, feelings, coming in, coming out. And if anybody has ever tried to meditate, you might know how hard it is. And I know for me, I'll get stuck on something and these looping thoughts, and it doesn't go away instead of just letting it go away. So it's also made me think about systemic and systematic cycles, you know. And right before this clip, you were talking about speaking, Isa actually says, "Here we go," to the audience. And that was what was in my mind at the time. And we talked a lot about, as a cast, of history repeating itself. And maybe it's not exactly the same, but it might look different. But the roots are from the same place. So there was lots of layers in all of that. But specifically, how do we tear down these walls? Are these walls really a protection? or is it a false sense of protection? Is it a barrier or progression, I guess?
Yeah, I also love that while this was happening, we were all still psychologically, when I thought about myself dancing, me being a part of the wall sometimes didn't sit well with me, and it made me reflect on what exactly am I doing to be a part of that wall? Because sometimes you are a part of that wall and you don't notice, and you are rejecting people. And there's a part where I am a part of this wall, and Natalie is pushed out of this wall, and I physically push her down. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, I don't want to be that person who is creating a wall without knowing it, and physically I'm putting someone down in the midst of me trying to protect myself, which is why education is so important to me, because I want to learn as well. I want to know what I'm doing so that I can be a better human being, so that I can make the world a better place. But I also really liked in this piece, like Cecil said, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. And I do think that even while we performed it, we were just in a dress rehearsal, and we had some people come in to watch. And we, at the end of this piece, we sit down in front of the audience at the edge of the stage, or we walk out into the audience. Some of the dancers decided to walk out into the audience, and we just look at someone in the eyes. We just stare at them. And the power of just looking at someone without speaking and just saying, I see you. And that is it. Just, I see you. I understand. I want to be here for you. Help me understand. And to get that connection with a stranger without saying any words at all was very powerful for me. It was something I had not experienced before, because I'm, to be quite honest, I'm not one who likes to look people in their eyes. I'm not one who likes to have a conversation like that. It makes me normally uncomfortable, but that it really helped me in conversations and helped me like really want to understand and listen before I speak, which is something that we like to talk about as Madco dancers now, because we've done a piece about communication, of making sure that when you're in a conversation that you're there to listen and not speak. You're there to learn, and you should always go into a conversation expecting to learn something, not expecting to give something. So thank you, Gina, for that.
I'm curious to know. Oh, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. I have a question for Gina. Do you see any correlation between that piece and what's been happening in the past couple of weeks worldwide?
Yes, I do. I mean, I do think that just what I was saying, kind of here we go again. And even this movement, I mean, usually I'm not so literal, but a lot of like I said, these images have really stuck in my mind. And it also, seeing this reminds me of a conversation I had with somebody recently. And this idea of just surrendering to authority, or just, I was just really also questioning, do we just surrender to authority, and how that feels, and feeling, I think Darrell was talking about it, this idea of don't hurt me, but then you're so exposed and so vulnerable, and just that, the vulnerability of that pose. And then also at the time, I think it was when we were talking about walls around, between Mexico and America. And so that was sort of fresh, and it just feels like here we are still, how many years later, still talking about that. And then how many years later talking about just these cycles, and partly why I chose the music I did as well, and sort of just this wall that's ever evolving, ever moving, ever like shape shifting into something different. It just, yeah, I just feel like that was representative of just this looping and cycles and cyclical nature of things. And in watching it just now, I was just thinking just how it does feel just as relevant as when I began the first day of rehearsal, and the emotions were raw. I remember starting within the week or the day after the protest leader was shot and burned in his car, and everybody was just really emotional. And then also we also experienced looking at the archives together. So there was a lot of conversation around that, and I just feel like, yeah, just that the conversation is just as relevant today as it was 4 years ago.
Thank you, Gina, for that. I'm curious to know from some of the other panelists, what, as we were talking about this idea of walls and the barriers that we create for ourselves and for others, what does the idea of barriers, what does that symbolize for some of you all? How does that operate in maybe some of your lives or just the way you interact with people?
I'll go ahead and chime in. Again, it's kind of like we've been saying, the whole, barrier concept is twofold. What are the barriers that we have to overcome? And what are the barriers that, we set up for our own protection? I think a lot of it has to do with, especially when you're in a new place or you're in a place to where, you're one of the only people there that look like you. What's the right thing to say? How can I be my authentic self, but still not make the rest of the room, uncomfortable or view me in a certain way? So we're only, we limit how much of ourselves that we give other people, depending on the environment. And I feel oftentimes we try to put ourselves in a box to fit an environment rather than the environment finding a way to accept us, because we're used to environments not accepting us. So, those barriers, and then noticing the barriers that people put up, for us, where they don't get an opportunity to get to know us because maybe they don't want to, or maybe, like I said, due to the differences, that they don't want you to have the same opportunity as everyone else. So it's almost like, you've got your armor on. There's also, a barrier to try to overcome, all while trying to coexist. So there's so many levels to it, that kind of get, jumbled in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. One of the reasons I asked that is because, so during this process, we had a dancer who he likes to play devil's advocate a lot of times, and try to, even though he was a teddy bear, he wanted to put on this persona of what if, or what about people who think this way. And so in watching this back, it made me think a little bit about this idea of who is the barrier serving, right? So who is trying to put it up versus who is trying to dismantle the wall. When we talk about separation, particularly thinking about borders, like geographical borders, a lot of times the borders are put up in this because of this idea of fear. We fear another, we fear the other. But then in everyday instances, a lot of people, particularly if you were to look at maybe those minorities who the walls are built around them, so many of them, and Cameron spoke to this, build up these walls out of protection. Instead of being fearful of the person that is trying to create it, I'm trying to protect myself. I'm trying to protect myself because I fear you. So it's this interesting duality of who is really the person in power, who is really the aggressor or the one that's more fearful of the other in this kind of situation. And I definitely think that was something that we played with throughout the piece of exploring, well, who is the aggressor here? Who is the wall really protecting in this particular section or this particular circumstance?
So if I may add just one other thing, even watching the protest, we protected buildings because property is power in America. It is intergenerational wealth. It is the rights of some citizens and not others. I really, when you said like, what do you think about walls? I was like, well, I was thinking about like white supremacy and like trying to have these racial conversations with my white colleagues and friends, and the othering, right? So like noticing the wall was changing to say like, well, it's not me who, you know, is putting up a wall, because I'm with you. I'm Black Lives Matter t-shirt down, right, Amy? I know I'm white with this Black Lives Matter. So I'm with you. I'm like, you know, actually, you wearing that shirt isn't necessarily a pass that the wall is down. Maybe you have acknowledged there is one, but the dismantling of that system or that wall has to be something on a daily basis, not just during the day protests. And we're doing selfies for our Facebook, our Instagram page, right? And so I do think it, you know, when we talk about walls, we have to then agree that the dismantling of that wall is for everyone's liberation. But we have to agree to that, because I'm really clear, like the people who are being targeted may have put up a wall to protect themselves, right? The property of self. But that's only because there was already a wall erected, right? That response to violence is often violence. And so to notice, you know, I mean, we just had a protest in Washington, D.C., and, you know, a fence was erected overnight. So like this ability to build them with bicycle racks, which is all those little things are anyway, with chains and locks, but like the quickness and the preciseness of being able to build those walls is really because we are so practiced in building and protecting the systems that oppress other people, that we can do them with any materials that we have in front of us, whether it's an educational system or a lucky zip code or a bicycle rack, that somewhere along the way, what we are protecting is the oppression of other people. And the protest is in opposition to the very system that is trying to be protected with these walls. We don't have a wall protecting us from Canadians. So why would we build a wall for our Mexican border? Really, there's only one America, even though we talk about being Americans, you know, the Americas are actually one continent. And so, but just like noticing like our framing for like how we are positioned and what is, you know, part of the oppression, the pattern, and then we got to figure out how we feed into it, but also how we dismantle it. So.
Yeah. I just had another thought. While Amy was speaking, something you said, just this idea, I know I was questioning, and I kind of posed the question during the process about, have we all been really on one side or the other of oppression or compassion or love or hate, and or is there a really defined line, or or are we crossing it? Like, have we all been, have we all committed maybe a small discrimination or microaggression or subconscious action in speech or even thought or towards another person? And does that count, you know, towards it? So I know that was sort of something that was going around. Are we all, can anybody really say that they've maybe been a part of it, being a part of the problem? Like we were talking about switching sides, and maybe sometime in Cecil, you were asking about, you know, how that relates to now. I was just even seeing some of the physical movements of knocking somebody down and stepping on them, on their shoulders and neck area, and it just kind of gave me goosebumps, not in the good kind of way, you know, in terms of likening it to now. So yeah, it's just very, it was a piece that posed a lot of questions, and I think we are still asking each other all these questions. So
We have some comments coming in to follow up with what you were talking about, Gina. Someone said they did see the work live in 2017, but it does feel new again to them and very relevant that they can learn from it again now. And then commenting on seeing the entry into and the resolution out of the repeated position of on the knees with the hands behind the head in a new way.
Yeah.
So just some more thoughts from audience members.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, audience members, for participating. We definitely want to hear what you think and if you have questions. So please, if you have questions, ask. But I do want to move on to our next video. We're going to go back to Dirt. It's going to be another excerpt from Dirt. I want to show the video first, and then we'll do another little conversation. Oh no, I did something wrong. I'm gonna start from the next slide. Okay. Love that piece. Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about why we fell to the floor, why the ending was the way it was?
Why the dancers fell to the floor. No, it's strange because as I'm watching it, I'm going over the directorial notes that I gave you guys, and I just I think in regards to the idea of community, we're not always supportive of each other. And there is usually or always a member that's going to fall. And we can make a choice to either watch them on the ground and keep moving, or we can make a choice to help them stand. And that is ideally that's why I ended the piece the way I ended it. I wanted to give like a very clear canvas, a very clear look, like look at how you treat each other and see it, and be in that reality of experiencing a body just fall to the ground. And that's really that's why I ended it like that. I think I don't think you always have to end your work on a high note or with, you know, sparkles, and because that's just not the reality of, that's not the reality of what we're seeing. It's not the reality of the of the lives of many of these indigenous people. It's not the lives of what we're seeing right now. It reflects the climate of what we're seeing on the news every single day. And I think it was just a taste of reality of what I wanted the dancers to experience. There's a moment where you guys catch each other's fall and you start to, I remember I asked you to start smelling each other's skin. And that was what happened right before you began to walk away from the audience. And the idea of smelling another person's skin on stage, it's almost as if you realize there is no difference in any of us. And that was really the picture that I was trying to paint. I always tell dancers to not touch each other superficially. And if you can break through the pores of the skin, then there's like a truthful story that will come out within the work. And that was that was honestly just a reflection of the last taste or the last scene of humanity that I wanted to show before you guys walked off. And then, of course, when you look back, when you're walking off stage and you take one more look at the audience, you just want to make sure that it resonates. You know, you see the dropping, you smell the skin, you see our faces, and then we walk away as a group, as though we are in this together, and we are more the same than we are not.
Definitely. I have to be honest, I felt differently doing it than when I watched it. And even from like rehearsal to rehearsal, because I remember us talking about, so the walk away was really important to me initially. And I was like, this is me walking away from my land and now I'm being forced, but I have to accept it. So how do I feel about the initial walking away? And then it became important to me to fall, to feel the land that I had to leave. So feeling that in the floor of just like, this is the last time I'm going to feel this. And then I need to get up, collect myself, find a friend, and let's leave together. Let's still leave as a pack. Like, let me have my moment with this piece of land, and then let me gather myself to be with my community, to then leave, to then looking at it afterwards, seeing and feeling the eyes on someone who just fell with no real reaction, with just a reaction of, I've acknowledged that you have fallen, but I'm not going to do anything about it. But we are still a community. We are still going to go together. We are still leaving this. We are still a part of this same struggle. And it almost feels like I acknowledge that what's going on, but me personally, sometimes I feel like I don't know how to help you. So all I can do is acknowledge that something is wrong. But the acknowledgement is only me looking. What else can I do? How else can I help you? And how can I learn how to help you? If I don't know, then what do I do? And I feel like sometimes that's how a lot of people feel, is that I know, I understand, but I don't know how to help. And that feeling of, well, what if my voice doesn't matter? So why should I do something? And so thoughts like, as I watched it, kept like going through my mind. But in the moment, I definitely felt like when I fell to the floor, it was me, that one last time of me being in this land before I left it. And then it made me think of Amy's TED Talk, Lucky Zip Codes, of how leaving that area can cause, is usually caused by someone else taking over. So now that I've left that area, I'm now, me specifically, if I'm African American, I'm now redlined, and this affects now how I learn. It affects now how I communicate and how I'm looked at from the outside world. And so there's just a lot packed into that one little section of like, you fell, you got up, you walked away. There just was so many layers after watching it that was like, as a dancer, I got to be what I wanted to be, but looking at from the outside in, it was like, man, this is a lot to take in. This is a lot to take in. Darrell, tell me how you felt as a dancer being in it and then looking back at it now.
Yeah, it's interesting, kind of similar to both of what you were talking about. Rewatching it back, it made me think definitely about the bystander effect, right? Like how if something happens, right? If you're out in a store and you see someone choking, 9 times out of 10, you are not going to respond because you assume that someone else will respond. It's kind of the bystander. You assume that someone else in this crowd is going to act out. And so looking at this now, it makes me think of current situations. And I think part of the reason why the movement has been so strong right now is because it's almost like we're breaking away from that bystander effect. It's like we no longer can wait for someone else to chime in. We can no longer wait for someone to extend a hand to help someone up. We have to, we all have to collectively grab the bull by the horns and act. I think something that touched me the most in that particular section was the idea of the sniffing and how intimate you can get with a different person. And dancers, we're used to, touching, and we're used to being close and intimate on stage. But I don't think at that point in my career, I had been to a point where that intimacy meant so much. It was such a simple gesture, right? It's such a simple, just, I think in that particular clip, it was Claire. And the other thing that was unique was that every night it was a different person. Mm-hmm. So every night we had the opportunity to make that connection with a completely different dancer in the cast. And so having that vulnerability and that ability to really open ourselves up to one another and to really just be enveloped in whatever the other dancer was offering at the time, I think it meant so much. It meant so much to be able to be that comfortable and that willing to be there for one another and to, again, build that sense of community with everybody else.
I wanted to share, sort of taking from Licia and Darrell's comments. I think not having context of the larger piece, when I first started watching it, that sort of bystander, what stuck out for me is this idea of how I feel that we've become spectators of each other's brutality. And as a result of that, right, and then also understanding the context of the historical normalization of the brutality against Black bodies, right? And so how long have Black bodies been entertainment at the hands of violence, right? So when we look at the historical context of picnics, and even to now, right, in the different ways that manifests. And so when the first part of that piece really made me feel, or really made me think about the ways in which we remove ourselves from each other's humanity, almost through viewing it outside of ourselves or as entertainment, really, for lack of a better word. And so that's really, that was really, I think, a powerful statement for me in the first part of the dance.
Debbie, do we have anything from the audience?
No comments have come in, but if I can just kind of piggyback off of what Sarah was saying, I think it's that idea of you could clearly see that everybody saw somebody fall. Everybody's focus was there. And then just that, okay, we're going to go about our lives back to routine. Everybody okay, I'm going to stay in my lane. And how can we break out of that? We see what's going on, and then how can we fully acknowledge and, the next steps that need to be taken and truly connecting, not just looking and seeing, but that connection fully as people.
I was thinking, to piggyback on what a lot of people have said, this whole notion of acknowledgement, it kind of took me to a place where a lot of companies right now, they're all making statements about what's going on in terms of Black Lives Matter. Everybody has a well-crafted statement. They all sound amazing, but many of them don't acknowledge that they've been implicit or should I say complicit in what part they played in this, how they don't acknowledge what the problem is. They just tell you that it should be better. So with an acknowledgement, you have to make a statement that, hey, this is what happened, or I did this, or I did not do this, and this is what we're going to do to fix it. But oftentimes it's just flowery language about, oh, the world should be this way. And if there's no change that comes about with the statement, then it's just empty words. And that's what I kind of gathered from this piece. You're robbing people of their dignity, of their land. And right now, Black lives, to piggyback on that situation, you're robbing people like a George Floyd of his life. But people are just some people are using it as a PR moment versus a real catalyst for change, and making it the change and steps to change a part of the cultural paradigm versus just talking about it. I don't know if I'm articulating that correctly, but it's a lot of chatter, not a lot of work.
I'm curious, and if you don't mind, Michelle, me kind of asking back, what do you think are some, are there physical steps? I mean, obviously there's not like a step one, do this, step two, do this, but is there a way to not highlight, but is there a way to be able to distinguish between those who are really about it and then those who, like you mentioned, like the flowery language? Like, is there a way to distinguish? How can we distinguish that, and how can we encourage companies to not just have a great PR moment, but to really step up and make change?
I think that's a great question, and I'm trying to figure that out as well. I'm certainly not a connoisseur, but for me, it's the action that comes behind it. Start at the top. Are you making changes within the organization that reflect a need to eradicate bias? Are you doing implicit bias training? Are you doing unconscious bias training? Or are you looking at your hiring practices? Are you looking at your marketing so that you're not in a situation like an Aunt Jemima or Uncle Ben's rice? Are you looking at marketing, who you're marketing to, how you're advertising, and what packaging are you using to get your message across? Are you intentional about supplier diversity? Do you have a procurement department that has a list of diverse suppliers? And again, are you intentional? If all things are equal, we have to be intentional about bringing different people in who don't look like us, who are not friends of ours, who are not at the country club with us. We have to be intentional about those things. And to me, that's when true change comes about. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not going to be an overnight fix, but these little bitty things start to chisel away at the establishment. Speaking of Aunt Jemima, we were talking about this on social media. Somebody said they didn't understand why that was even relevant. Why get rid of Aunt Jemima? Any symbol, and I said this earlier, any symbol of oppression might, whether it be trivial or not to some, it has to go. It's a step in the right direction, because these little bitty stereotypical images are embedded in our minds, in our psyche, Black, white, or blue. It's embedded in all of our psyches. And it has a lot of impact on how we move in life. It affects us as Blacks. We sometimes suffer from internalized depression based on demeaning stereotypes like Mammy, which is the premise of Aunt Jemima. And then for majority groups, the privilege that comes about systemically is all connected to those stereotypes.
So I'm gonna push and be a little like radical in this moment. I actually don't want any more baby steps. I feel like we've been baby stepping for quite some time. We figured out how to get the Me Too movement popped off like overnight. I'm just offering. Even though it was an African-American woman who brought it forth, they could only hear the white woman who had some fame and popularity. Now, the idea that white women would be hurt or harmed in the workplace, that caused a movement. Like overnight, companies were like, you know what? We don't want you to touch women anymore. They weren't talking about us, y'all. They weren't. And overnight, everybody's like, okay, no more touching, no more rubbing, no more saying horrible things to women in the workplace. And it's like, you want to talk about a decrease that we saw, like magic, right? The idea that there has to be this waiting and that Black people have to somehow be more patient is part of the narrative around how we keep the systems in place. And so I would ask for some radical movements, like some truth and reconciliation moments within major corporations. It isn't that all the white men are at top because they were so smart and genius. It's because they were the only ones allowed in the door, right? And so that we have to have some like honest dialogue and conversations. We're gonna have to talk to our white female counterparts and say, like, you have benefited a lot from affirmative action, and we actually need you to mentor women of color. Like when we say women, it should include all women, and it doesn't include all women, and it hasn't been including all women. And so I think, with the movement of white people being much more visible in this protest than any other protest, I want to say a couple of things. Black and brown America have been heartbroken by white Americans before. This would not be the first time, and hopefully the last time, that would occur. I think for the first time in a very long time, we are hopeful that white Americans will also hold white Americans and those institutions accountable for the pledges that they have made. The 13% of Black people holding a major corporation accountable is not going to do it. But as a community, as a collective body of people, if we all said, hey, we'd all like equity for all children in the system of education all over this country, it would get done. Like the mommy mafia of PTOs would have it done. And we know it would happen because it's currently happening for some children, but not all children. And so I really want us to think really radically about how do we flip the script? Because like it's already been, I feel like Fannie Lou Hamer, like how long, right? It's already been a long time. We've already been waiting. We tried the whole like dress up, be nice, and ask, please, and thank you. That was not working. And we got to get the attention. If a Target burns down, Target's not even upset about the Target burning down, right? And so to notice, like, I think our inability to imagine a world radically different than the one we can create, I'm going to offer these are the places where artists come in mind, right? Where people who have never seen anything dance to that song ever could create some movement and movement with bodies of people that motivates people to cry, to weep, to feel inspired, to feel empowered. Like that's the bridge to like all the intellectual thinking and speaking, right? Like if one more person comes up to me and asks me for a book list, I want you to read, and I do, but I actually want you to do. And I mean, the piece we just saw where people were laying down, like this isn't a new tale. What is hopefully going to be different is that we help people up, that we notice the places where we have been the oppressor systemically, institutionally, and like we say, no more, never again. In my wildest dreams, I wish George Floyd would be the last name that we will ever utter to the violence that we have seen. But people can't even imagine it. And if you can't imagine it, we're not even working to create it. So I'm just going to say, like, we got to get creative. What we've already had hasn't been working. It definitely hasn't been working for me or my children. And I would like for us to create an America that we're actually proud of, like all the time. But I do think we need to own up to the ways that the systems have favored and advanced some people for a very long time, and then create strategies, not hope and wish it happens, not dream it one day, but to like actually create strategies for a more equitable society, because we've been missing out on large populations of really brilliant people because of our racism and institutions. We've been missing out on talent, artists, whose art gets seen, whose art doesn't get seen, whose art gets, we pay top dollar for, and whose art is not perceived as worth anything at all. I mean, it is in every system. It is in every system, from healthcare to the arts to higher education. And I think we all work to dismantle it wherever we are. And until it ends, we don't take no for an answer. I got nothing to lose.
Yeah, lots of powerful words. Yes, thank you so much, Amy. We are starting to dwindle down on time, but before I introduce this last clip, I do want to acknowledge first to say thank you to Jennifer, Gina, and Cecil. As a dancer, like Amy said, it was more than an honor for me to be able to be in those pieces. It was borderline life-changing to be in a piece like that. So thank you to all three of you for allowing MADCO to be a part of your vision and to have that vision come to fruition. Thank you. Moving on to our last clip. This is another little clip from, it is choreographed by Gina Patterson. And then we'll talk a little bit. And then I want you all at the end of this clip, I do want to talk about the clip, but I want you all to say a little bit something, some like last words. And I want to make sure that people are inspired, because as an artist, it is important to me to let this younger generation of artists know that this is how we can use our voice, that your voice is important, and using your art, using whatever platform you have is important, and your voice will be heard. And it, no matter if you think it's not or is or it's not, I want you to use your voice. I want you to feel empowered as an artist, as a non-artist, as whoever you are, to feel like you should say something if you have something to say. So with that said, let me go ahead and share my screen. Dee-dee.
Ooh, that is a section.
Man, oh man, do I remember that piece.
Mhm.
I'm gonna let someone else speak. Tell me your thoughts.
I mean, of course we would like that piece, right? There's like all the love and hugging and help, of course, but of course we would love that.
I have to feel that portion right there was me being physically abused. I was being physically abused by Natalie, and it felt like I was hugging her and trying to hold on to her for dear life, and she rejected me every single time. Every single time I wrapped my arms around her, she literally and figuratively bullied me off of her, like elbowed me to the face. And and I don't know if you noticed in that video, but in real life, she elbowed me in the nose. I thought I was bleeding. I thought I was out for the count for a second there, but I was still in it. But yeah, I think it looks beautiful, which I think is the facade or the layer that you see of like, this is beautiful, but the pain behind all that, that was hard for me to physically do and for me to emotionally do. And it's still sometimes hard for me to emotionally watch without switching off so that I don't get emotional. Sometimes I have to like just watch it for what it is and to critique myself as a dancer rather than watching it as how I actually felt in that moment, because I did feel like whatever that was that I was hanging on to didn't want me. And that applies to a lot of aspects in my life, specifically of me wanting something so bad that I keep getting rejected. So that's how I felt in that. But also, and that's just purely my duet that happened with Natalie. There was a lot that was going on. And if you looked at a lot that was going on, there were clearly different relationships that were happening in different partnerships. I think there were some partnerships that were happening that were clearly more supportive. But if you watch Darrell and Darian at the end of that, Darian goes to touch Darrell in a very soft manner, and Darrell like pulls away extremely hard. It's like, no, don't touch me. And it makes you wonder why, if I'm touching you tenderly, why would you reject me like that? Why would you pull away? Or that like those other relationships that were soft and giving and just, oh, you're so supportive, but it's the same exact movement. I'm doing the same movement that you are, but I'm being rejected every single time.
It's interesting coming off of Amy's comments kind of about our previous topics, because in watching that section this time around, it definitely read to me, and of course I watch myself because that's what you do. But watching myself in my duet with Darian, in particular the quartet as well in the center, it was this like very happy story, right? It was like, oh, we're coming together, peace and love, great. And then towards the end, it's this shift. It's like, and watching myself break away from Darian, it was almost like, stop feeding me this fairy tale. Stop feeding me this falsehood about what we're doing when we're not really doing anything. And I don't know why like, and I don't know, maybe it's just because Amy just said what she said, but that viewing it this time around, it was very emotionally different from when I had done it initially. Yes, it was, breaking away from him and not having that same connection and not being connected to someone. But this time around, it was, I definitely saw it more, just like, stop feeding me these lies. Like, stop feeding me this information. And especially when Natalie zooms back to the back of the stage on that back diagonal, she's like, she breaks that facade to me of this soft, lovely music and this soft movement into something that's just like, hey, we gotta wake up. We gotta snap out of it and do something.
Yes, Darrell, I saw a lot of that this time, actually. And then Isa, I was really emotionally moved and choked up just because I can remember and feel it as if it was yesterday, watching all of you. And there's so many layers again to this piece, but I remember at the time it was sort of a zoomed in look at cycles and perpetuating cycles. And I think it speaks to, as we move forward, how are we individually going to move forward through our lives? Like what actions are we going to take? Will we perpetuate abuse and sort of negative cycles of our past, or how will we treat other people? How will we treat ourselves? It kind of makes me think a lot about respect and self-respect and hate, and just how that affects our intimate relationships, our friendships, all the people that touch our individual lives, and then how that ripples out in the world. And so I really do think that how we as individuals choose in our big actions and small actions and radical actions, just how we can just affect or cause the ripple effect moving forward in terms of what are we going to do about this?
Gabby, did we have any comments from the audience?
Yes, we have some comments coming in that they're seeing a toxic relationship maybe being portrayed, where one tries to own the other one. All the comments for this piece, if we backtrack a little, we did have some comments on the last clip of Dirt, references that they felt like this made them think of George Floyd specifically because we saw him on the ground, yet bystanders felt like they couldn't do anything but yell and record. We all looked, however, it led to a reaction. I thought that was a standout comment that really resonated with kind of the conversation we were having. I think that's all that we have for now.
Great. So before we close this out, does anyone here on the panel, one, I want to say thank you, of course. Thank you to every single one of you. I am honored and blessed to be in a position where I can ask you to just use your voice. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. But I want to know if there's any last words that you would like to say to the people who are watching and to future generations of people.
I would say please contribute to the arts. This is so important. It's another way to get education to young people. It is a way that we all connect at some point in period. And it is just a beautiful way to express and model creating something new and something that we've never seen before. So thank you to the artists and the choreographers, and may you be the model for how we lead the rest of the world, quite honestly.
Thank you. Amy, you were talking about arts and arts education, and I would just say, you know, I was just teaching a couple of weeks ago a summer intensive, and sort of a lot of, not only do I create work, but I really believe strongly in arts education, and just even working with 12, 13, 14-year-olds in creativity. And I think there's a way to teach creativity and open-mindedness that can help these conversations. And then I do think we can use our power in another way. You know, we can use our art form's power to heal and unite and build community, just like we are now, to have conversations. And yeah, I just would say to any young artist, just, you know, do the work and find your voice and use that voice, and use your art to unite. So that's just where I want to leave it for me. And thank you all. I was really humbled to be a part of this and to learn from all of you. So thank you.
I think what I'd like to leave folks with is very simply is to honor each other's stories, right? And to seek them out. And to really understand what your own story is. I think I am a firm believer in the arts. And I think that, to echo Amy, the ability to connect and see each other in different ways through art is, I just don't think that there's any better medium to really allow different perspectives, and how folks interpret those moments really says a lot about the lens and perspective that they bring into the space. And so as someone who I consider myself a storyteller, I think we're all storytellers. And so the necessity to engage with each other in that way, in my opinion, along with all of the systemic stuff Amy said and the reparations, I think Michelle said, on top of all of that, those things, I think being able to honor each other's story is absolutely crucial to moving forward.
Well, thank you all again. Please, 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 all of you all who are watching, go to our website to learn more about these amazing panelists, to learn more about Hand in Hand, and there are links for educational sources, but there's also links to donate to us. And when you donate to us, you're donating to the community. So we appreciate everyone who has donated, and we appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining us tonight for Hand in Hand. Thank you so, so much. Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you
are
so much.
amazing.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night, guys.
Good night.